Welcome everybody. My name is Simon Stevens. I'm the Head of Publications and Events at the Museums Association. I'll be chairing and facilitating today's event. I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting for the South East of England. We're really delighted you can join us. I hope you're keeping safe and well. This is one of our regular meetings for MA members all over the UK. I'm sure the tech will run smoothly, but do bear with us if there are any problems. A reminder that these online meetings are free to all MA members and all those who work in institutions that are MA members. The programme has changed slightly from what was initially online in that our director, Sharon Hill, is on leave, so can't speak. But we've still got a really fantastic line of speakers for you today. So you've hopefully all been sent the joining instructions to help you get the best out of this meeting. But just in case you missed anything, there's a few key bits of advice before we start. You should all be muted automatically, but if not, please mute yourselves. We have both the chat function and the Q&A function running in this meeting. The chat function is for sharing ideas and thoughts and web links between the whole group, including the speakers. The Q&A function should be used to ask questions of the speakers, which I'll try and keep an eye on. Do keep your questions short and to the point. We are trying to make these meetings as interactive as possible, given the limits of the Zoom webinar platform. One of the things we can do is that if you want to ask a question as attendee, I can invite you to join the panellists and you can ask questions directly. I have done this before at conference once. So if you're keen to do this during our panel conversation, do say so, and I will try and make it happen if you want to do it. Other than that, you can leave and rejoin the meeting anytime. And a reminder that we're recording this session and it will be available on the MA website quite soon for those who missed the meeting. So, there is a hashtag for the event if you're using Twitter. I think the joining instructions might have said North of England. That was obviously a mistake. The hashtag is MA South East England. Now, with all that out of the way, I will hand over to our first speaker, who's Maggie Appleton, who is the President of the Museums Association. This is Maggie's final members meeting as the MA President, so we're very lucky to have her here. Maggie has come to the end of her term, has been replaced by the equally wonderful Gillian Findlay, who works for Edinburgh Museums. So, welcome Maggie.
Thank you, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Although I don't work in this region, I do live in the region, although of course it's a huge Uber region, but it's really nice to see you all virtually. And I'm just sorry that we aren't together in person. I think we were going to be in Portsmouth, in fact, today, which shows what an Uber region is. It's a long way from where I am in Hertfordshire. I'm really looking forward first to the programme this afternoon, and particularly from hearing from colleagues about the impact on you and how museums are responding, how we're looking forward and learning from this dreadful time, but looking forward to the future as well. I've been asked just to give a bit of an overview of my reflections on the challenges and opportunities for our sector to kick us off. It feels like I'm saying the things that we're all talking about all the time. So please bear with me if it feels very, very familiar to you, but I hope it'll serve as a bit of a helpful introduction and perhaps lay out some common themes that will probably emerge and be built on across the afternoon. Because of course we've had an incredibly precarious year and we're about to have another one. It's a year since we closed our doors now, can we believe it? And most of us have had a year navigating through both professionally and personally, coping at times with personal loss, balancing caring for ourselves and our friends and our families, both mentally and physically. And even the last few months have been a roller coaster, haven't they, of hope and fear and uncertainty, going from being excited that Christmas is coming to all being going back into lockdown again, and feeling positive about the future, but feeling that we've got to caveat every positive statement we make by saying, oh, but I know we've got to be careful and we're being cautious and we're being. So it is a very strange time where there's so much playing around in our heads at the moment, but someone who's just had a call for a vaccine as well. I'm feeling positive and the sun is shining now. But the 17th of May feels such a long way away for those of us who are looking forward to opening as soon as we can. But having said that, there is a feeling that we are moving towards positivity. And I've spoken to a lot of colleagues this week whose children are back at school who've been greeting me with, "It's quiet in here, it's fantastic." But of course, for many whose children are going back, there's still a worry about some of the nervousness about going back. So none of it's plain sailing. I'm using Portsmouth analogies, if you've noticed, even though we're not physically there. But equally, I've got some lovely colleagues who are or about to visit loved ones in care homes and be able to hold their hands for the first time, and that feels extraordinary. So whatever your situation is, it's really good to be with you, and I hope it's going well for you. So I'm just going to sketch out a little bit about my thoughts about challenges and opportunities. And of course, they do overlap and interweave. But I have to start off, I guess, with the challenge of organisational health that we're all battling with. And while some museums will survive relatively intact, others we know will close their doors permanently, and more still will emerge as smaller organisations with leaner ambitions. And many staff, of course, have been furloughed, and some really sadly have lost their jobs. And of course, organisationally, independent museums, and this feels like ancient history now, but of course, independent museums were hit first and immediately as the tap turned off their funding, and the bounce back we know won't be immediate. And the worry for publicly funded organisations is one that will go on for even longer, I think. Of course, the public purse is going to be threadbare for a number of years as recovery builds. And we know that so many museums in the public sector and local authority museums in particular were really struggling before COVID hit. And I think the impact's going to be more long-ranging for them. So, of course, we really do welcome the support from government for helping us keeping going, but the effects were both immediate and will be long-lasting. So it's an immense challenge for our organisations. But of course, this is all about people and the health of people, and first of all, people right across society, as well as in our organisations and personally, because that lockdown and then coming back has impacted us all differently. And there's no doubt that it's accentuated wealth inequality. It's hit the poor harder and hit Black people and those from other ethnic minority communities harder. And Black Lives Matter during this pandemic time, of course, shone a really stark spotlight on that and made us all pause for thought about how hugely far we've still got to go to tackle racism in our organisations and our sector and society, and create a generally fairer and more equitable society. And in terms of those broader challenges, that wealth inequalities that I've touched on, it's just far too obvious, isn't it, how they've been really accentuated and highlighted by the pandemic. Poorer people are more likely to die, they're more likely to be in frontline jobs, so we're more exposed to COVID. And people who are less well off, who are working, are in roles with less or no job security. And those less well off, of course, if they can work from home, are living in spaces that are less comfortable and smaller and tricky working conditions often. So all of that is a challenge. And I think that huge inequality that it's shone a spotlight in has been tremendous. And I really do hope that one of the opportunities when we get to them is that we're going to learn something from that. So one of those challenges is how can we make a difference to tackle both wealth and social inequalities and discrimination in museums, especially when our resources are also stretched. And there are some brilliant examples that we all know, both nationally in our 4 nations, internationally, and also in our region here. And one that I was struck by was the Towner in Eastbourne, and congratulations to them on their Art Fund prize, how they work with partners to support families who were disproportionately affected by the national lockdown. And just looking at their online appeal, it really struck me how it was focused not on directly specifically about keeping the museum running, but it was focused on the end result, that it was about directly funding the resources that be delivered to those who needed them most. So big shout out to all colleagues at the town. And of course, the challenge as well was how we would continue fulfilling our purpose, our visions, our missions when we were close to the public during those closure times. And I think probably for most of us, it's been 2/3 of the year. And we have seen brilliant ways, of course, of sharing that content online because of COVID. Some of that was delivered because of COVID. Some of it was in preparation and development anyway, or happening anyway, but really came into its own because of COVID. And again, another example from our region, the brilliant Queer the Peer online exhibition from Bright Museums is so engaging and compelling, hearing from community curators, volunteers, and wider LGBTQ plus community members of the importance of representation in the museum, what their favourite items in the exhibition are when the museum's open, and of course the research that's going on to reveal more stories. It was a brilliant continuation of the work Brighton have done from its Museum of Transology back in 2017, and then of course the physical Queer on the Pier exhibition that opened before lockdown. So, and do have a look at some of those reflections online at Brighton Museums, because I found them really, really interesting and really moving. So some of these challenges have turned into opportunities. But one of the challenges, and we've talked about health of people generally, the health of our colleagues coming back and reopening is something that's really making me pause for thought an awful lot, and something that I talk about with my team a lot in our planning for reopening, because I do think it's going to be harder opening this time. It's probably something that we've talked about more than anything in our team, and the need to be thoughtful and considerate as we're coming to reopening. And we had one of our fortnightly webinars with our team this morning talking about reopening and sharing some of the joy that's happening in the meantime. But I'm always so conscious when talking of colleagues that we are all listening from completely different perspectives when we're having conversations, and particularly when we're having conversations like this online and you're all out there. And I don't know whether you're sat in a beautifully spacious place or a tiny little bedsit. And I have colleagues who are living in both extremes. I've got colleagues who are doing the cheering because their children are back at school and they've been desperately trying to balance homeschooling with the work. I've got colleagues who live alone and are lonely. I've got colleagues who live alone and enjoy being alone, but actually are missing company. And of course, we've got volunteers, old and young, who really rely on coming to the museum for much of their social life, and they're missing that deeply. So I think every conversation we have is a massive challenge, because everyone we're speaking with, and particularly in forums like this, is listening with different ears from a different perspective and hearing different things. And I think when we talk about opening up and thinking about the kindness of the way we behave with each other and our thoughtfulness for each other, which is a constant thing playing in my mind and a constant conversation we have, that doesn't mean to say that we aren't really still expected that we will go back and we will be performing in a tip-top way in our museum, because being kind doesn't mean that we're not tackling poor performance, but what kindness means is that we're being aware that people are reacting in this hugely challenging context in different ways. And I think it's very easy to be thoughtful about people who are struggling and upset, and it's often harder to be thoughtful by people whose reaction is one of anger or switching off. So you know, all of that is important in terms of thinking about how our colleagues are faring. And I do think it's different than last summer, and definitely for us, and I'm sure for most of you, the operations reopening will be much more straightforward this time. Well, you know, what was completely new last time in social distancing, sanitising, all of those things, of course, we've learned to a T, and I'm sure we're all still evaluating and thinking, you know, what the more transmissible variants are doing, what that means for us, perhaps in tightening when we go back. We certainly are thinking about that. But we've done it before and we know what we're doing. So we're not complacent, but we are confident. Having said that, in terms of our people coming back, I think we will all struggle in different ways, mentally and physically, through that. I think for our people, it's going to be really tough, and even for those who desperately love our jobs. We've been working really hard to keep people motivated at home. And some people were having almost to lock the doors to keep them out of the museum, but other people have been furloughed for a long time. Some will be nervous about coming back, and some will still have people, you know, potentially vulnerable people who've not been able to have vaccines at home. So we mustn't assume that because we were open successfully, very successfully before, that it's going to be easier this time. But having thought about those challenges, many had opportunities less within them. There are opportunities that come from this. Number one, we love working in our slippers, don't we? Or perhaps not, but a challenge that became an opportunity was that working from home. And it's hard to think back to a year ago when none of us, very few of us, had experience working in Teams and Zoom, but we're all so experienced in that now. And many of us love that, having that opportunity to work from home. So there is a silver lining of positivity that's helped those of us who might have been closed to thinking that working at home was a great option for people. That has opened up. The new world order is about flexible working, and that helps the environment for those people who drive to work. It saves cost and it saves time, and the time it saves is really fundamental, whether you're spending that extra time catching up with work or it means you're spending more time with your family or getting some exercise. It's valuable. I'm really conscious in that, though, and I said that the challenges have opportunities. I think all the opportunities have challenges as well. And you know, again, talking to colleagues about how we can have a more blended working environment in the future that will be a positive thing for people. Again, I'm really conscious that a large number of our colleagues, their job has to be about working in the museum because they're frontline welcoming the public, or because of their specific collections roles. So again, we mustn't always just assume as well that that's going to work for everyone, and that there are some benefits that some staff will be able to enjoy and others can't. And actually, for me, that does present a challenge when thinking about how we're going to continue to want to make sure that we are not separate teams in our museums, that we are one team working for going forward and thinking about each other. We mustn't cause divisions between our teams, many of which have been there historically. And I think during the pandemic, we've managed to break them down to a certain extent. Because another opportunity on my list is that we've really remembered that we love our colleagues. And my experience certainly is that people have really appreciated each other and supported each other in the main, both across different museums in sessions like this, but also in our museums. We all know about the sort of social tea times together as well. And, you know, the way people have got to know each other, excuse me, our two museums are 130 miles apart, and colleagues that have never met each other before have really struck up good friendships this way. And that really helps people's understanding of each other and their ability to work together positively. Equally, when we opened last time, every back of house person was on the front of house rota to support front of house colleagues. And that really bonded the team. And so, you know, these issues going forward that some people we hope will be working flexibly, I would hate that to cause a divide and really sort of pull some of those fantastically positive things away. So another opportunity is that I think disasters can inspire people to be their best selves. And The news has been filled, of course, with stories of individuals and organisations pitching in with creative solutions to help the communities. Museums Change Lives, of course, has been focusing on place and identity and health and well-being and social justice for a long time now, and it feels that this has become more of a soundtrack, coming from government at times and from funders. So National Lottery Heritage Fund priorities are still, of course, about caring about our heritage, but they're now stressing well-being, a sense of place and skills, as well as economy and organisational resilience. And lockdown gave opportunities for all of us to work in our communities, or many of us to work in our communities too. And certainly at our museum, we were able to release space for our local authority next door to us in London to distribute learning resources, but also we were a hub for essential supplies. So food banks really came and made a base in our London museum, while our West Midlands museum, we're distributing all sorts of brilliant resources for people that couldn't work online through our local authority colleagues. And of course, I've touched on it, but that opportunity of embracing digital, which even colleagues who were absolute Luddites before, and possibly I may have been a little bit of one of those, we've all embraced. And that having that global reach through the power of digital has been intensely brilliant, even though we've mourned the loss of real people. And when we emerge, we really will be able to blend both. I'm sure that won't be lost. And digital really can make our museums more accessible to more people. And from this region, I love Colchester and Ipswich museums, online resources, and Chatham Historic Dockyards tours of HMS Cavalier on the Google Arts and Culture website is absolutely fabulous. I love that tour. Thank you, colleagues. All those tours were engaging, personable and immersive, and I'm sure will continue to be a joy for those who will never be able to visit because they live too far away, as well as being a brilliant taster and reminder of a real visit as well. Another opportunity, I think, is that we've learned agility. And for a sector that's about permanence with our collections, we've acknowledged that we're often slow to move and change, but here we are. We have been agile, and that should give us confidence that we continue to be. Hastings, can you hear the whistling kettle? Sorry, I'm hoping my son's making me a cup of tea. Hastings Museum and Art Gallery's brilliant digital museum was a great example of agility and was shortlisted for the Museums Change Lives Best Lockdown Project. And I'm looking forward to hear Damien from Hastings speak later. And at Hastings, they really saw COVID coming in March and moved really swiftly to build their digital museum with a very clear aim of combating social isolation. So they were up and testing hashtag Hastings Digital Museum right at the very first week of lockdown. And they reviewed and evaluated and made clear decisions about really focusing on active participation. So brilliant work and brilliant support there for communities. I think another perhaps broader opportunity is that we may have been helped to see that longer term disruption is normal and that we need to plan for perhaps the things that aren't obvious. And I think people in general, and museum people in particularly, we do like to unconsciously assume, I think, that tomorrow and next year will be more or less like today. We expect gradual evolution. That's our comfort zone of understanding. But the world is changing so radically. That assumption could well guide organisations off a cliff path. And when we wrap our heads around how much we don't know about the immediate future, how many ways it could play out or how bad the outcomes could be, it really helps our ability to think. And the fact that we've seen something so extreme come, perhaps we can all begin to take time and think the unthinkable and think ahead of what might happen. So I hope there might be some agile thinking coming from this, as well as some agile planning. And I think my final opportunity is my favourite one, which is that we love the real thing and that the public love us too. So digital has been amazing. And the brilliance of digital doesn't diminish the importance of the real object, though, and the power of our spaces. And you know, we are museums, we're about collections, we're about the real thing. Digital helps us express that and learn about that in so many different ways. But touching and smelling and really being, I mean, being under our Lancaster moves me every single time. And when I welcome people back through the doors over the summer at our museums, and they told me how delighted they were that we were open, I only had one response, and that was, thank you so much, but you're not nearly as excited as we are. So I think that remembering the real thing, digital certainly isn't something that should be a competitor to the real thing. It's something that's absolute added positivity. So in conclusion, I think despite the bleak picture, we can emerge stronger and wiser and more resilient together. And I think by supporting their staff, museums will remain poised to rebound and to be part of a national recovery from this, and absolutely demonstrating our power and relevance. And I do believe we can help build back to a more just and equitable world. And that will establish our role in creating a better future. And I look forward with confidence because I really, really believe that museums can and do change lives. We're not the NHS, we can't fix all the world's ills, but working with partners, we can make a change that really does change people's lives. And we will come back, perhaps a little bit battered, but with the wisdom of experience. And the Museums Association will absolutely continue to make the strongest possible case for the support of our museums and for all of us here. So I do want to finish by thanking the Museums Association team on behalf of all of us in the sector. And I'm pleased that Sharon's taking a day off, but a big shout out to, a big thank you to Sharon and the brilliant team at the MA, to Simon, thank you, and to the wonderful Tamsin who's coming up, but to our reps as well, Mark and Rebecca and David will be hearing from later, to everyone that volunteers for the Museums Association, but to all of you as members. I do finish my term in a couple of weeks' time, but I will absolutely continue to sing the praises of the wider Museums Association team. It's a values-driven and member-focused organisation, and I've been a member for 31 years now, and I'm looking forward to the next few. So, Simon, back over to you, and then I think it's over to Tamsin.
Thanks so much, Maggie. Yeah, so as Maggie was saying, and I said earlier, so Maggie is coming to the end of her presidency of the MA, and this is her last public appearance as the MA president. So thanks so much, Maggie. You've been brilliant. We've been to some, we've been so many members' meetings, more than I can remember, and we've been to some amazing museums and met some fantastic people, and then we've carried on Zoom. So thanks so much. It's been great doing that with you. So yeah.
Cheers, Simon. Hope to see you all in person very soon.
So next up we have Tamsin Russell. Tamsin is the Workforce Development Officer at the MA. Tamsin is going to discuss the workforce support we offer, including recent initiatives such as the Wellbeing Hub and the Sticks and Stones Bullying in Museums report. So over to you, Tamsin.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. My presentation is exactly that. It's in two parts. So I've got some slides that I'm going to share, and if you want copies of the slides after the session, please let us know and I can share them with you. So let me just share my screen, bear with. So the first part really in terms of our discussion is more around professional development. And in the conversations that I've had over the course of the last 12 months, there has been both a collective and shared experience of what has happened in the sector, but also a unique experience because everybody's context is different. Everybody's life situation is different. Their aspirations are different, where they've come from, where they're going. So everybody in this space, 45 of us, if I look at the participant list, have all had, whilst a shared and collective experience, a unique experience from their own perspective. And I think that's important to note. The conversations I've had with people have, centered this time last year about suddenly job offers being removed and withdrawn. People's aspirations have been affected when projects they've been planning for the last year and a half have been taken out of, a programming space. People have talked about this concept of lost year, as if everything has sort of almost been in aspect, nothing's moved forward. There's this sort of frozenness where we've not been able to necessarily to move forward. But in addition to that, just as Maggie has highlighted, is there has been some tremendous learning. This time last year, I had never presented on a Zoom call. There has been a huge amount of learning in terms of both personal, knowing about ourselves, but also our professional practice. And a lot of the emphasis has been around digital, but also about collaboration and partnership working. So there have been lots of opportunities for us to learn. So we have been making progress. But in my sort of reflections, I suppose, is that often because learning in our sector is associated with going on a course, going to a conference, something that's very tangible, very physical, the learning that we've been doing over the last 12 months has been far more emergent. It's been responsive, it's been at home. So we don't often think about how much learning we've experienced. So I would challenge you with these questions. First of all, think of one thing you've learned, because you will have definitely learned at least one thing in 12 months that perhaps you never even anticipated you would have done. And think about something you want to learn, the skills for the future for our sector. Everything looks digital, but more than that, about monetizing our collections, revenue, partnership working, the list goes on. So begin to think about what your aspiration is for the next 12 months. And obviously, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't highlighting this, is how can we help? How can we make sure that we are supporting your professional development in any way, shape or form? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we have on offer. So the first thing really I want to emphasise is that we have something for everyone. So whether you're a volunteer, a member of staff or a freelancer, there are opportunities for you to develop within professional development offer, whether that's formal or informal. So for example, as a freelancer, where I don't necessarily get a support or access to funding for training or career advice or a framework for development that you might get if you were a member of staff, our AMA program enables you to have that development framework to support you through whatever your aspirations are. From a career stage perspective, whether you're looking to get in or whether you're looking to get out, there are different opportunities. Again, the fellowship for those individuals that are looking to develop their leadership capability or to celebrate their leadership contribution. The focus also for me is around multiple functions and multiple roles. So one of the benefits I feel from working at the Museums Association and having been a member before I became a member of staff is that it's a universal group. So there are fantastic specialist professional networks and membership bodies that do fantastic work. But for me, the real strength of the MA is that it is around collective multidisciplinary work and functions. And that's what we try to do in what we offer. So whilst we might be looking at creating a well-rounded museum professional that understands and respects all of the different fields within a museum, there are other particular things that will talk very clearly to your area of practice. For example, our learning and engagement manifesto or our empowering collections report. All of that research all enables us to develop as professionals. And again, the roles that you might have, whether you are a volunteer, a trustee, a manager, a member of staff, whatever it is, wherever you are in that hierarchy, there is something that we've got to offer you. My role is really interesting because what I'm trying to do for you guys here, the 45 of us are here, is to make sure that our members are supported and developed, that you get good value and return for whatever your membership level is. So there's lots there, whether you're an essential member or whether you're a full member. But in addition to that, my role is sector-wide. So how can we at the MA and how can I, in terms of professional development, support those individuals that aren't members, support individuals that want to come into the sector or want to progress? So it is a fine line in terms of how we're sort of managing all of those different things. So what can you expect? This is a sort of an idea, I suppose, in terms of a pathway. If we were going to start with individuals wanting to come into the sector, and then also establishing themselves as leaders. You know, we've got a very clear careers event, Don't Stop Me Now, which is for pipeline talent, you know, laterals coming in from other sectors, students, individuals that are at the very, very beginnings of their career. Our online learning program, Museums Essentials, and we've got new courses coming through, but I'll talk about in a moment. We then have the associateship of the Museums Association. So 150 mentors, 300 AMA candidates, all going through a variety of different learning experiences at the moment. Next week, I'm very excited about is our Moving On Up program. So our one-day conference for mid-career professionals. I'm going to be doing a session called Career Interruptions, where we'll talk about a whole raft of different things that may well have put you back a little bit, and how can we get you back into that saddle. Mentoring is part and parcel of our COVID response specifically, whether that be career conversations, emergency mentoring. This is something we have a proven track record in and want to continue offering. So if you are a member, please, we still have spaces for this emergency mentoring until the end of March. So make the most of it. I'm a professional body member of a different professional body, and I often say to my husband, oh God, I'm not really sure what I'm getting for it. And he says, have you looked at the emails recently? And I was like, no. So we have loads of things on offer that you can really capitalize on. You just need to throw your hat into the ring. And then we have the fellowship. So that's for those individuals that have had a significant contribution and achievement in the sector or want to. So the competencies around our fellowship are all around advocacy, leadership, and generosity. So all of our programs pretty much are supported by a development framework. So we'll have clear competencies, so you know what you're developing for. We have support groups, so you can develop your critical thinking, your objective analysis. I manage the benevolent fund. We have lots of money that can either pay for fees or CPD activities, and a whole raft of resources that can enable you to think about your reflective practice and beyond. Mentoring is a key part of all of our offer, but very specifically part of the AMA. And then we have a range of events. So in addition to those two careers events, we have our, our webinar series, our members meetings, a whole raft of different things that absolutely support the competencies. Things that we've done in the last 12 months, and will continue to do so in this considering situation, is just ensure that we are supporting those individuals that are already on our programs or want to become a part of our programs. So from an AMA perspective, we now run twice monthly Q&As. We've introduced something called Conference Swap, where we all watch separately a particular conference session and then have a facilitated discussion. We have the AMA Facebook pages, a whole raft of different things. Mentoring, I've already highlighted. Emergency mentoring, please email 1.5 hours of mentoring expertise with a group of 30 different mentors. And career conversations are going to be relaunched again very, very soon. So what else is on the horizon for me and you in 2021-22? So one of the things I'm going to be doing is a full workforce review. So root and branch, everything we offer, what does it look like in a COVID and post-COVID world? Focus on workforce wellbeing, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Inclusive recruitment and selection. How can we make sure that we are enticing and supporting the best talent that is available, and supporting our campaigns? So from a campaigning perspective, anti-racism, climate crisis, and learning and engagement, all of those things are aspects that we will be developing museum essential courses on to support the sector going forward. So that's everything about professional development. I'm here smiling because I think we've got a lot to offer, and participate and you will develop. I'm now going to talk about something that's slightly less positive, I suppose, in a way, because I'm going to start talking about our well-being offer, but specifically around our sticks and stones research as part of that. So feel free, if you've got any Q&As, to put them in the Q&A function, or pop anything that you might want to in the chat function as well. So let me think about workforce wellbeing. And again, something that's become, well, it's always been an issue in the sector, but it's become more evident in the last 12 months, whether that is because you've been furloughed, whether it's because your opportunities to work have been curtailed, whether you've been isolated. Again, you will have identified coping or controlling strategies to help you. If they've worked, fantastic. If they've worked, tell other people about them so that they might help them as well. But really do think about what else we can do. From a digital perspective, we are able to highlight and signpost a whole raft of different resources and techniques to help you. I just need to know what it is so I can research it, write it, and then put it on the web. So our new Workforce Wellbeing Hub is a hub dedicated to wellbeing. We have a variety of different articles, as I've just highlighted, that really hope to enable you to think about how you're doing and how you can ensure that your wellbeing is being supported. We have our Facebook pages. So if your ability to find work as a freelancer, as a student, as an employee or not, if you're at risk of redundancy, our Facebook group for support is there, and we do a variety of different postings every week, from tasks to wellbeing to a whole raft of different things, as well as a very clear support framework. Lots of vacancies get advertised through the members of this group. And if you're a manager, or if you're a team leader or a leader, our Managing in Crisis page, again, mirrors some of the content, but not all of the content from that book. So you get some day-to-day updates about what you might need to think about returning to the workplace, risk assessment, you name it, there's new stuff on there. We have moved very seamlessly into the digital space. So, Coronavirus Conversations, a dedicated one. This is on our website, all about workforce wellbeing, as well as dedicated conference content. So what we're trying to do is just make sure through our Workforce Wellbeing Hub, but also through the other hubs that support this, for example, the Redundancy Hub, just to make sure that you are feeling supported, even though you may not have direct access to a line manager because you're working remotely, or because the way that your employment is working, or your employment status, if you don't have a manager, you don't have someone to help you. So that's everything we're trying to do proactively to support individuals' wellbeing. I'm now going to turn to the piece of research that we did right at the end of 2019 around bullying in museums. So there is a content warning around this. So feel free to take a step back if you want to, in the digital space. Go make yourself a cup of tea if it's something you don't want to listen to. There aren't any graphic stories, but I will be talking about bullying, and I know that can be significant and palpable for people. So I'm going to stop smiling. It always feels a bit ingenuous to smile when I'm talking about this, but I do want to get across some really important things. So the background and the aims to this research came primarily from 2018 around the Me Too campaign, but it's been consolidated and emphasised with the Black Lives Matter campaign from last year. We were really clear that no sector is immune from bullying, yet we knew there was very little research that had taken place. The research that had taken place in the arts, primarily performing arts, kind of a visual arts, but it really wasn't museums and heritage. And what we knew very clearly, that bullying creates, endorses and perpetuates exclusion. Most of the work that I've done in my 20-year career has been around traineeships. How can we entice people from diverse backgrounds into the sector? That's great, and that is good. That's only as good as how they're treated once they get here. Everyone should feel as if they belong, and that means it's not just about recruitment and selection. It is about treatment and engagement while individuals are in the organisation. So this was the background, and these were the aims of our research. So we wanted to raise the profile of bullying, we wanted to provide signposting for information, and we wanted to undertake some preliminary research so people could realise that it did happen, it does happen, and understand the nature and scale of it, and then publish these findings. Whenever you're doing any sort of research, as I'm sure a number of you know, definitions are really important. So these are the two definitions that we embraced as part of the research. So Anne-Marie Quigg wrote Bullying in the Arts in 2010, and this was a definition that we felt was really important. And then we also looked to ACAS in terms of how they would explore and implement any of their interventions around bullying. The definitions are important. I just wanted to highlight, I suppose, the elements of these definitions. So for us, from an MA perspective, bullying is a conscious act. It is sustained over time. It has malevolent intention, sorry about that, and detrimental impact. So those four things are really, really important, and that consciousness is important as well. we wanted to make sure that we were highlighting how significant this is, and that's by using appropriate language. So often when there's sort of concepts around bullying and harassment in the workplace, we talk about the term bully, but that has lots of playground connotations. It tends to dilute the seriousness and the impact. So we use the word target as opposed to victim. So we're not victim blaming or putting an undue burden on the person who's on the receiving end of bullying. We use the word perpetrator because that is what the person is doing with intent. And actually within that, the perpetrators could be multiple. So there's a concept of group bullying, where there is a group of people that essentially adopt a campaign about an individual. We might talk about reverse bullying. This happens in roughly 25% of cases in other sector research, where a subordinate would bully somebody above, and then peer bullying from a co-worker perspective. We use the term witness as opposed to observer, because a witness again highlights the seriousness of this. This is somebody who's witnessed bullying behaviour. So as a witness, you can't observe a bullying relationship. What you can only observe in the moment is some bullying behaviour. And a bullying behaviour is a negative behaviour that has detrimental impact. These are 20 commonly accepted behaviours that would be classed as bullying behaviours. I'm not going to read through all of them. But what is important, and part of the research, was people had to identify which ones they experienced most. And you might be looking down this list. I'm not going to be able to find one now, but there's one that says, withholds information. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, oh, I limited access to that report because, oh gosh, it wasn't ready to be given. Is that bullying? Well, no, that's not bullying. It says respond quickly to somebody. Oh my God, I never got back to that person last month. Does that mean I'm a bully? Remember, conscious, sustained, malevolent, and detrimental. So another cluster of these behaviours delivered in a conscious way over time, not just single episodes or signifiers. So we did some research, we have the findings on our website. We have a 2-pager that I really highlight. Please share this broadly, trustees, CEOs, anybody that talks about bullying. This is a really good summary of what the research was about. And then we created a recommendations matrix as well, which has recommendations around a variety of different levels to help organisations, individuals make change in their areas. So what was the research in the final 5 minutes of my presentation? So part of the research highlighted, not surprisingly, that targets were most likely to be bullied by their direct line manager. That's the person you're most exposed to as part of your experience. Most common bullying behaviours were around being overly critical, micromanaging, undermining in public, and limiting access. So people, there were examples where people were told they couldn't speak to other people in their own organisation. You are not allowed to speak to that person. 25% of individuals felt that they were bullied as a direct result of a protected characteristic. So this has a very clear legal situation in terms of duty of care. But in addition to that, people also reference things of class, competence, and very clearly about if you were being brought into a rather traditional organisation, recruited for your vision and your tenacity to make change, and then that being held against you within the actual organisation. Bullying had negative impacts both at work and at home, psychologically and physically. And the physical impacts could be about people not sleeping or not eating, but equally it would be about high blood pressure and some far more devastating impacts, certainly in terms of potential suicidal thoughts and intentions around that. Individuals felt that within their institution that there wasn't necessarily the support there. So often people said that they didn't realise they were being bullied. They didn't know what the procedures were because they never thought they'd need to know them. But when they were in that situation, that then they didn't know where to look, or they didn't have the energy to look. They felt that organisations often, and certainly HR departments in organisations often, were more worried about the organisation's reputation than the individual's experience. And for those individuals that raised anything formally or informally, 90% of people felt that they weren't satisfied with the result. And this is not specific to our sector. This is common practice across all sectors. For me, what's really saddening is that 44% of those individuals decided to stop working in that organisation. So all of that technical expertise, all of those relationships built with communities, all of that collections knowledge leaving, but 11% chose to leave the sector, which is why I come back to my first point about traineeships and diversifying the sector. Fantastic, but not only if they then don't leave at the end. So this is really important. So the recommendations, there are 28. Are they rocket science? No, they're not. I don't think it's too complicated to know when you shouldn't be bullying somebody. So the recommendations are very straightforward, and they can be from having a good bullying policy and to knowing where it is. But we did have recommendations at these 5 levels. And you might be able to see that the last level is perpetrator. We thought long and hard about whether we should put in recommendations for individuals that either identified as a perpetrator or felt they had the propensity to be a perpetrator, that to keep them out of this conversation, how are we going to make change? We needed everyone in the tent to look at how we affect change in the sector. So how are we doing? What are we doing? So member engagement, we're doing this presentation at every single one of our members' meetings for the next 12 months. The Wellbeing Hub has additional resources. We've just published our cyberbullying resource, and we'll be adding more resources around digital harassment, specifically in the social space. We're going to start having some roundtables with individual organisations that are operating at grassroots levels. We've got materials you can share. So if you've been inspired by this presentation, by all means, invite me to speak at your conference or your event. But we also have a dedicated presentation that you can take from the MA and then deliver it in your own organisation with all the relevant information so you can change your organisational space. What can you do? That's my alarm saying I've got 5 minutes for questions. Please read the recommendations, reflect on your own professional practice, continue conversations with your teams and your organisations, highlight where this research is, share good practice and case studies with us. That's a real challenge. And if you are going to do research in your organisations, do it. You know, staff surveys, staff engagement opportunities, make sure you've got those points there. And then finally, if you want to be more involved or you want more information, just email me. You know, this is a workforce campaign that we are committed to seeing out. This is not a report that should gather dust, because that would be a disservice to the sector and would be disrespectful to the 510 people that participated in this research. So I'm now going to pause and stop my presentation and just see if anyone has any questions at all about anything that I've covered so far before we go into the break. I'll have a quick look. I'm just having a look. So the question just about the campaign was just about being an advocate and an agent of change. So talking about it, highlighting it, you know, reflecting on your own professional practice, you know, looking at those 20 behaviours and identifying the extent to which you may well have demonstrated those, but on what basis? Was there something else that was going on? So contact me and we can think about what that then looks like. Any other questions from anybody, either about any of the professional development content I've covered, or more specifically around the well-being and sticks and stones content that I've covered? I appreciate it was a whistle-stop tour. I'm just going to go into the chat function now. Okay, so 1 second. So emergency mentoring is still available. Email me. I've talked about getting involved in the campaign. Museums come out with statements supporting BLM, but no tangible action has been seen. How do we challenge this? So this is a really interesting point. There was certainly a sort of almost like a reflex, wasn't there, back in July, where lots of organisations came out with statements. And actually, if anyone's interested, I collated every statement from sort of primary sector support organisations. I've got it in a PowerPoint presentation. Lots of organisations chose not to put out a statement because their focus was, this is not about virtue signalling, this is about action. Until we know what those actions are, we're not prepared to put out a statement. So I think there is something about holding organisations to account. I think There's something about saying, well, what next and when and how can I help? But I do think my own personal values and style is, I think we move forward together when we are being supportive and being too hypercritical. But that's just me. So that is, for me, is about how can we move this forward? What else do we need to do to take that next step? So I, for example, sit on the Heritage Volunteer Group steering group, which is a UK-wide group for all volunteer managers. Please join, it's free. And we didn't put out a statement, but we have now convened an EDI group, and we have an 18-month action plan around how to address diversity and inclusion. And that came as a response from the events of last summer. So I think lots of organisations perhaps didn't come out with a statement but are still doing stuff. But equally, as your question relates to, there are lots of organisations that came out with a statement, but other things have taken over, or that was their intention. I am going to be quiet now because otherwise Simon will suddenly step in. So thank you so much for all your conversations. I will be on here all the time, look at the Q&A function, but equally pop some things into the chat function and I can help you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Tamsin. That was brilliant. As Tamsin said, there's loads more professional development support on our website. So that's brilliant. So next up, we've got a panel discussion. It's going to take me a couple of minutes probably to find our speakers amongst the attendees and promote them to panellists. So if you would like to go to the loo or make a cup of tea or possibly both, there probably is time. So bear with me while I promote the panellists, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes and we'll get started. Hi everyone, gradually joining us.
Hello.
Hi Liz. Hi Steve.
Hi Simon. Hello Liz. Hi
Hiya.
Damien.
Hello.
Hi Sue.
Hi Sue. So I'm just waiting to Damien. Damien's back now. Brilliant.
Hello everybody.
So that was quite quick. So we've got all of you remarkably. So I'll just put Tamsin back to an attendee, and then we can kick off.
Thank you.
Right, all done. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and being patient. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. The idea behind this session is to look at what museums have learned over the interesting past 12 months that we've had. I won't introduce the speakers. The information is in the chat at the start, and they're going to kick off by introducing themselves and then talking for a few minutes about what they've learned over the past 12 months. So I think we were going to go in alphabetical order. So if by surname. So Damien, would you mind starting?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Simon. I'm probably the person with the dodgy connection, so if I lag or if I go slow, just shout me and I'll turn off my camera, which is not a bad thing, to be fair, but I guess I'll start then. So I think in my role as the head of the museum, but also the lead for culture across the borough, I'm still not ready to think about the long term. We're still receiving too many short-term decisions. There's still too much uncertainty in the sector around cultural organisations for us to look too much beyond the next 6, 12 to 18 months. So that's my caveat on this discussion, that very much we're in a short, medium-term recovery mode, not looking at the longer term yet. But I've really got 3 points in sort of thinking about where we are with longer term thinking. And it's firstly, it's about expectation. Over the last 12 months, people's expectations of what cultural organisations and museums can deliver online has really shifted because everyone rushed to be online and do things digitally. But actually the reality is that we need to measure that response, because it was only possible because we were closed. The resources that normally would go into an open venue and running exhibitions and events on site were diverted onto the online engagement aspects. So we need to remind councillors, we need to remind stakeholders, communities and visitors and audiences that actually that's not possible when you have a socially distanced museum building to run. And we need to start those expectation management at the moment, because in 6 months, 12 months time, people will see only the good things. They'll think back to that great community project that you did, and they won't see the underside of it, that was only possible because we didn't need every member of staff in the building to make sure it's COVID secure. Secondly to that, I think it's about understanding and reviewing what the new normal will look like in the post-COVID pandemic world. Because at the moment we've got a slight idea from between the lockdowns, but actually as the guidelines change and as people's expectations and behaviours change as they move forward into the vaccine and the post-pandemic world, is what does that mean for the venue? Does it mean we have to have every member of staff front of house? Do we have to do ticket booking? Do we have to do all those things? Does it mean we can use resources in other ways? So we've got to understand over the next 6 to 12 months how people will interact with museums in particular that don't have outside spaces, and how they'll look to engage with their digital offer if that's still there, as well as the physical offer that we have in site. And I think thirdly to that is, how do we facilitate that discussion so that it's equitable with everyone in the community, with everyone who wants to be involved in the museum, and how we get people who still don't have access to digital, how we get people who are still not allowed to leave their houses, and how do we get them to come together and have a fair and honest discussion, especially in light, as Maggie touched on earlier, of the BLM, the Black Lives Matters, the anti-racism movement, the climate emergency, restitution discussions, colonial legacies, ideas of representation and inequalities that have really came to the fore over the past 12 months of lockdown and the pandemic. And how do we make them representative? Because without them involved, it really is just perpetuating the past. We're not helping or adding to the discussion. But if we're not the people that are in those communities, we need to make sure there's a way that we involve them, because ultimately it's those discussions that will identify the priorities and the direction of travel any organisation, particularly Hastings, will be going in over the next 12 to 18 months and beyond. So that's really my sort of tuppence worth on that one. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Damien. That was a great start to kick us off. What does the new normal look like? That's a $6 million question we're all struggling with, I think, in various areas. So that's brilliant. So next up we have Liz, I think, if we're going alphabetically. Over to you, Liz.
Hi, folks. And if you don't know me, I'm Liz. I'm from the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge, and we're a dinosaur museum. That's why we're trying dinosaur dress today, so you remember that. And also to remind me that we have dinosaurs, because I haven't seen them very much. And I've heard lots of really good things from Damien just now, and from Maggie and from Tamsin, and like absolutely all those things chime with us. So it's sort of thinking about the things to pick out and talk to you. And this picks up from Maggie talking about kindness. The big thing for me has been that staff well-being thing. I mean, I thought we were an organisation that looked after our staff, but gosh, the last year has really made me think about how we can do that better. I think our professional and our personal lives have become entwined in a way that had never happened before. And I know that my team share stuff with me that I wouldn't have normally expected them to, and likewise. And I think, gosh, how can we use this to strengthen our team, but also to really think, are we the sort of are we a compassionate, kind, supportive organisation in the best way we possibly can be? So I don't know what the answer to that is. And I think what Damien's saying is we still don't know what the future is, but that's for me as a priority. The other thing is I'm still sort of slightly rebounding in shock, but not shock, about some visitor research which we had yesterday, which came out of, I received the results of yesterday, which was surveys that we ran of people that visited us in that sort of window last summer, sort of summer and autumn. And it was about visitor diversity and a number of demographic factors. And when we compared that data, and of course it's really tiny numbers, we had sort of, a hundredth of the visitors we would have normally had in the year. We've taken essentially a 5-year step back in the diversity of our audiences, both in terms of age. They are older, they are wealthier, They are less diverse in terms of race and ethnicity. There are fewer disabled peoples, and I think we all knew that, but it was to see this data really to sort of measure it in this 5-year thing. And it, of course, to me, I'm thinking, right, it's our programming. Over the last 5 years, our programming has enabled us to diversify audiences. What do we do this year? Do we do programming? And you think, oh, don't know. How are we going to do this? So that's that challenge that I'm really thinking hard about, is how do we really try and sort of recoup that, and that tension, of course, because those people that came in to the museum last year, I think our spend per visitor in the shop and our donations are enormous, much higher. They came in, they were really generous. They spent loads of money. They bought all their Christmas presents in our shop. Fantastic. But all those people, all those people that didn't come near us, hadn't even got the headspace to think about going in a university museum that looks really scary if you've never been in there. So yeah, I'm really trying to think about how we get back to where we were. Even that's a bit depressing, isn't it? So let's also, one quick one, and then I'll shut up. One quick one, and I think it's picking up on what Damien said about expectations. There have been some really fantastic projects, and I think there's been some mentioned today across the sector. And what I'm really keen to do is celebrate that actually really little projects are really good too. We've done some really good projects, but they're quite modest projects, but they're really innovative for us. And they've involved people having to learn new skills and make films and stuff. And I really want to celebrate and show that that doesn't have to be one that makes the headlines. It just, if it reaches some people in a different way, that's good stuff too. I'm really up with that.
Brilliant, Liz. Fantastic. That's really interesting. On the staff wellbeing idea, I know our incoming president, Gillian Finley's wellbeing is a really important thing for her. She's really interested in it. And Edinburgh, I think they've got 3 priorities, the council going forward. One's sustainability, one is poverty, and I think the third is wellbeing. So that's going to be a big part of her presidency, wellbeing. So it's really interesting to hear that. Steve is also an MA board member. So Steve, on to you now.
Thank you so much. A couple of thoughts from the 12 months or so just gone, and a look ahead to the future. I'd say the first thing that the last 12 months has shown us has been particularly that Norfolk Museum service staff and volunteers are amazingly hardworking, adaptable and resilient. I think it's been a sort of a feeling that museums are perhaps not operating at full capacity, but we've certainly had major capital projects ongoing. We've been caring for collections, doing site checks. Security has been more of a problem and concern than it would be if we were fully open and operating as normal. Being a local authority service, we've also had some of our staff thrown into the absolute sharpest of sharp ends in terms of the COVID-19 work. They've been helping distribute food, coordinate volunteers making phone calls to the vulnerable within the county, and they've been doing a super job at that. So hugely thankful to the support, and I think that probably informs how things will be over the coming 12 months, which will be probably equally challenging in different ways. Heard lots of brilliant stuff about digital. I think we in Norfolk have obviously, like everybody else, had to get much better at that much quicker, but we've produced some, I think, brilliant content. I think we will be moving permanently to a hybrid model, particularly in things like school delivery. But as has been pointed out, I think brilliantly by the staff, there's only one of them, or there's only one of them in any one point can do one thing. So you can't be simultaneously delivering physical school visits to museum sites at the same time as you're talking to schools in a classroom via Zoom or something like that. So we have to be careful how we use that opportunity and balance that kind of resource. The last 12 months has told us a lot about people who don't have access to digital facilities. Digital poverty is I guess, some of the way we describe it. We've tackled that over the last 12 months in a number of ways, not least working with colleagues at the County Council in children's and adults, and using amazing resources from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England to create arts parcels that have been directly delivered to families, identified families within the county, to give them the kind of access that other families have had via digital means. And those have been valued and valuable. And one of the things that those parcels had in them was a board game on the Egyptians, created by young people who were working with us as part of the National Lottery Heritage Fund supported Kick the Dust programme. So that repository of creativity in our talented staff and some of our volunteers and young people is something we'd like to hold on to and continue to use. We've talked about well-being, the well-being of our staff and the well-being of our communities. There's going to be a huge demand for that well-being support, which I think museums are really well placed to provide over the coming year and in the years to come. We've talked about kind of, young people particularly, and the life chances that have been sort of, damaged by the last 12 months and will continue to impact. We'd like to be there for our young people within the county. One of our brilliant trainees, Lara, whose story and blog you kindly publicised, Simon, shows that, again, just because young people are very adept at using digital technologies to communicate with each other doesn't mean that they don't miss terribly the physical contact and face-to-face interaction that we all need as human beings, and that we want to deliver again as soon as it's safe to do so on our sites. We realise and know that museums are a critical part of the economy. I think we'd like to see museums front and centre of the recovery, the economic recovery in Norfolk. Our major sites like Norwich Castle, Gresham Hall and Time are usually part of that kind of tourism economy and perceived as such. But all of our other 10 sites have a role to play at a local level. We'd like to be there. We've talked about BLM, the transformational effect that's had on us all. That has fantastically accelerated a programme that was already going on at Norfolk Museum Service, and we've taken a significant, I think probably game-changing report to our Joint Museum Committee in late summer, which has set out the roadmap, if you like, to use the phrase, of what we want to achieve as a service in that area, and will be continued to committed to over the coming years. And finally, just looking ahead about kind of the coming 12 months and the period after, I think we've lost income streams across museums from various sources, and we'd like to say, we can see some of the ways that we might be able to replace those income streams. There's the levelling up agenda for some of us, the Community Renewal Fund. We've got the government's 25-year plan for the environment. The placemaking agenda continues to be significant for all major funders and for DCMS. And I think those are the ways, health, wellbeing kind of funds that we want to access at Norfolk Museum Service and continue to use to deliver the sort of services that we want to for the people that we really care about, our communities. And that's a couple of thoughts from us. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That's really interesting. I think digital poverty is an interesting one. It was sort of talked about a bit in terms of schools and kids without laptops and stuff like that. But in many ways, it feels slightly one of the still sort of untold stories of the past 12 months, and its impact is very profound, I think. So next up, Sue. Lovely to see you, Sue.
You too, Simon. Thank you very much for asking me to be on the panel today. My name is Sue Shave and I'm the Museum Director at Bucks County Museum, although we are just changing our name to Discover Bucks Museum. I want to start by quoting Kate Bellamy from the last AIM conference, if our MA members don't mind me not quoting from the MA conference. She said, don't waste a good crisis, didn't she? Those of you that heard her. And it absolutely encapsulates our approach to the last 12 months. I completely agree with Maggie about the silver linings. For us, the silver lining was that we are right in the middle of delivering completely new galleries, telling the story of Bucks from 200 million years ago to today. And that's 25 years worth of lack of change. So this is very transformational, and we were right in the middle of that. And this has been able to give us the opportunity to have some space to deliver that, because it's going to change everything that we do in terms of the collaboration with audiences and so on. So what have we learned from all of this? Well, obviously, like many, in terms of delivery, we have changed and brought up to the top of the agenda the digital strategy that we were all planning to do but hadn't quite got round to it. I know lots of museums were already doing it, but also lots of us weren't. And things like webinars, like Tamsin. I had never done a webinar before. I wouldn't say that I'm expert now, but I lead at least one a month. I did one on LGBTQ stories back in February for the History Month, and we one on artists webinars in February as well. Busy month, huh? All sorts of things, from video, not new, but we weren't making very good use of it, Zoom, live streaming, all of those sorts of things. And we also tried, this is an opportunity for us to experiment with new things again, because you know what it's like when you're delivering 24/7. Staff that normally up to their eyes now either were on furlough or had an opportunity occasionally to actually do some of these things. And we tried things like yoga in the garden. That, again, not groundbreaking, but it was the first time we'd ever done anything like it. We used a company from Wickham. That meant that all the clients from Wickham came. We hardly ever get people coming from Wickham because they think that Aylesbury's too far away. It's not. I live in Wickham. But it's that sort of thing, and the well-being, the case studies we got out of that, people saying to us that this impact, I'm back to what some of you have said earlier, museums change lives. These people were saying to us, you are changing our lives. We're having a really awful time, and coming here and sitting in your garden, and it was thankfully sunny on at least one or two occasions, meant that and we'd not tried any of that before. So this is something we really got to incorporate into our programming for the future. But I'll tell you what really shocked us, and this was really unexpected benefits from the digital strategies that I'm talking about here. So take the artists webinar that we did. This was partly we did this because the Bucks Art Society and Tony Hart Art exhibition that we have on at the moment opened for all of 2 days, and 30 people got to see it, and it's still obviously closed. And so we put on this webinar, and then several things happened. So we found that we were delivering new content. So we had the daughter of Tony Hart, Carolyn Ross, who came on and told amazing stories about how her father had been in South Africa, and the influences on his art. I mean, those of you like me who remember Morph, all that, it was really fascinating because we'd never known that side of him before. If you came to the exhibition today, if you were allowed to do that, you wouldn't get that sort of content from people. We realized that this was something, as we were exploring with people's questions and debating at the end, the artists from the Bucks Art Society, very clever artists, fantastic works, talking about how their process and the impact of COVID on them, all of that sort of thing. Again, we wouldn't have provided that. This was new content. And so we realized that that's something that we've got to keep doing. But even more surprising than that for me, because I'm the one running all the webinars at the moment, partly because a lot of staff are on furlough, as I say, new skill number one, is I send out all the links. So what happens is I have to set aside 10 minutes at the end of each of the webinars for people to email me back, because they do. And it's fantastic. So they're emailing the director and they're saying, we wouldn't have ever come to your museum before. You say, why not? Well, it's nothing to do with COVID, actually. I'm mobility impaired, or I live in Scotland, or, whatever the reason was. And most of them are more local than that. But we did have people joining us from Scotland and Pakistan for some of them. They were, people who knew artists or whatever. But, for me, I did not know there was a whole audience out there who thought that it was really important that they engaged with their local museum and their local artists and the objects and stories. And they write to me and say, look, from the comfort of my own armchair, I can engage with you. I've never been able to do that before. I won't be able to do it when you reopen. Please keep going. So there was a whole audience we were not aware of or doing anything for. So another reason that we've got to keep going. And of course, the other thing is that it means that you can grow exponentially audiences on subjects that are of interest around the world. And if we haven't got a handle on quite how to do that yet, but that's the next set of skills that we've got to learn. So that for me, I have to say, is one of the biggest learning points in terms of what we will do in the future. And the other thing that we did, again, because people were not delivering 24/7, was a lot more consultation than we normally do. And we went out and talked to over 100 people from 18 different communities, and we said, what do you think the museum's for now? What should we be doing to impact on your lives? We collect objects and stories, so how can we make that work for you? And the responses and the importance to those people of that process. It's not new to be doing any of those things, but the importance of it was something we hadn't realised, again, that our community wanted. So in bringing those people in to make those decisions was really important. Best bits of new working, well, you know, working from home, I have to say, lots of us who've had health problems, and I am one of them over the last year, it has been a godsend, quite frankly, to be able to work at home. And I know that's the case for many of my staff. What Maggie was saying, people with homeschooling and all sorts of issues, it's been a very, very tough year. But we've all learnt that actually, instead of going to London each week to see the consultants for our capital project, we've saved a lot of time and money, hopefully both ways. And this is something that going forward, there needs to be a blended approach of home working and not without, as Maggie said, without losing the team working spirit and sort of time and efficiency. Also, of course, you know, a lot of these, the use of digital technologies can be a new income stream for people. You know, whether we monetize it, you know, or not, you know, we've been giving it away, if I can put it like that. You know, we often just ask for donations, depending on what it is. If it's a community source, we did something on Hanukkah or LGBTQ, we don't want money to be a barrier to the reason people do not join us on that day. But our Christmas science show, we monetized that. We actually made some money. So we've got to think about, you know, when do we do that and how often and you know, what's the rationale? And then finally, the sort of new business model and new funding model. As Steve said, we've got the same issues. You know, we're not going to make money out of school visits and admissions and secondary income and gift aid and all of that. If we're lucky, we'll make a little bit of it. So this year, thanks to the Heritage Emergency Fund, we've been able to take on a fundraiser. Hurrah! So that means that now I'm expecting that we'll be able to raise something like 10% in the next year, and budgeting for that, because she's been able to put in core funding applications. She's an expert on corporate sponsorship. Wrong time, but we'll get there. Legacies, individual giving, you know, all of those sorts of things you all know about. But, you know, I've been doing some of that, but not all of it, because I don't have time. And actually, that's revolutionized our capability to be financially stable in the future. So I think that's, you know, all of those sorts of things are things that we would have got to that, because we were planning for that. Lots of new things going on besides the galleries. We've got a new name, Discover Bucks Museum. We've got new branding coming. We've got a new website. Part of that is courtesy of HEF. But this is all about transforming. And if we don't take those audiences with us and learn the lessons about what those audiences want from us, then, you know, that transformation isn't going to happen. So it's a key part of everything, and it's really just accelerated it. So silver linings, definitely, I'm all for them.
Brilliant, Sue. Thanks. Yeah, a lot covered there, and I think that, you know, the question of what our museum's for now kind of gets to the heart of it. And I think that the thing about digital stuff, about, you know, creating new stuff rather than just replicating other stuff is an interesting one. So there's some questions actually which I'm going to ask. The last meeting we had, I asked everything and didn't get anyone else a chance, so I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to read this one out slightly clunkily, but it's from Helen Adams. Helen, thanks for the question. So it's Liz's point about inclusion and diversity is really important. Visiting museums will not be a priority for many people over the next 12 months who face far more fundamental concerns. Is one answer to concentrate more on removing the focus from the physical building as already serving an overserved audience, and looking at community outreach and online as primary channels from remaking the case for relevance and benefit? And it says, what are your thoughts, Liz? So we could ask it to everyone, but maybe Liz can start because it's directed at her.
Oh, if only I had all the answer to that. I think it's such a good question. And I think my immediate thing is that actually we've got the opportunity, we've made new contacts and new links during lockdown, and, you know, and it was good to hear about how the other programs, very similar things that for example, Steve's been doing in Norfolk. You know, we've had really good contact with the City Council. We've been distributing activities through food hubs and other sort of networks, and the sort of children and young people's participation service. So we've got quite good links that are targeting both, you know, sort of addressing the digitally disenfranchised people, and also people just having a sort of pretty tough time financially. So we've got those links, and I'm sort of thinking, how can we build on them? How can we sort of pick up and say, okay, dare I say we might be past crisis point? I don't know. I suspect there's a lot of families still aren't past crisis point, but, you know, can we build this into something ongoing? You know, those sustainable sort of links there too. I think the blended model of delivery online and face-to-face will continue, but I also know that my team, actually, who was it? Was it Steve? You said that there's only one of the, you know, there's people saying there's only one of us. you know, I think we're all a bit sort of like on the edge of sort of quite how thinly we can be spread. And, you know, and that comes back to my point about kindness and well-being of staff. And that's why I sort of say, actually, if you do something really small, that's okay too. So I think I'm feeling it's that fluid planning over the next couple of years. And one thing that I have really felt is we did a big planning exercise about 18 months ago with all my team, and we put together a new strategic planning, identified priorities. And actually, when I get that out, it still stands, which so sort of, there's a few bits which is sort of like, oh, risk register, that was a joke, wasn't it? But actually, we stand by those principles and sort of think, well, why are we doing this? What are we trying to do? It sort of helps us make those decisions about where the little projects can fit together into something bigger. So I sort of haven't got a sort of magic wand to say how to do it, but I think it's just being sort of just finding your way quite carefully and picking up what you've got and really making something of it, and not just not pushing the staff too hard because they'll pop.
Brilliant, thanks, Liz. Damien, do you want to come back on the same question, if you can remember it?
Yeah, it's a great question because it does cover what we're arguing with or we're debating internally at the moment between various people, and it is to borrow the phrase flexible, about being flexibility, about having the flexibility to do it and getting a balance between both the digital delivery and the physical on-site delivery. There's another aspect to it as well, which is recognising museums' roles within local cultural ecologies. And often museums will pay for freelancers or will have a role in building networks or keeping communities together through weekly meetings and things like that. So I think there's a balance of working out what are the priorities for your service, but also making sure that you are supporting that wider ecology and not just saying we're not doing anything, we're fully closed, but actually having a balance of it and really building on those partnerships and relationships that have developed for all organisations over the past 12 months. Partly it's around someone to go talk to get through the day, but also it's around serving local communities and building on all of that experience, but not planning too far in advance, being able to be flexible and agile and light on your feet around changes and responses is definitely what this last 12 months has shown our organisation as a local authority, that we need to be and be able to flick the switch and do something entirely different in 24 hours is going to be so important until everything's settled down and there is some sort of balance and understanding of the future.
Thanks, Damien. That's great. Steve, do you want to address that as well?
Yeah, so again, I'll just reiterate super question. It's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think for us, it's gone from being a would be nice or a highly desirable to absolutely essential. It's a premier kind of route to talk to our audiences and to engage. I think I'm particularly intrigued now about that hybrid model going forward, that limited resource where you're going to place that effort, but actually the chance to engage with high quality content and offers internationally, if you wish to do so, with niche markets, possibly monetized, possibly not. It is a very exciting one, and we were hoping to open the digital as the way to go to our audiences before we can open physically. So lots of opportunities, but lots of important discussions still to happen.
Thanks, Steve. You're breaking up slightly there, but I'll put on to Sue now. Do you want to answer the question, Sue, as well? Thanks. Yes, just to build on what I was saying, that was one of the major methodologies that we'd learned about lots of unexpected benefits. I didn't talk very much about the community engagement that we've done using those techniques and are still planning to do. So we have a community advisory group of about 20 people. They all come from massively different backgrounds. We're still building that community. We've been able to do an awful lot with them online in terms of consultation over the museum name, the branding, the purpose of the museum, and all sorts of really important things that we want them to have a voice in, and also to consult with them about what type of programming they want to see in the future. We've done that with charities as well, local charities and like Bucks Mind and the visually impaired charities and so on. So we're trying to do things like putting the Festival of Colour and Festival of Light online, We work with local partners to that's a complete collaboration. We're trying to do things like the community iftar that we put on, well, it's now nearly 2 years ago, and that because what we don't want to do is to lose all the links that we've had with those communities. We've really worked very hard. We were so unrepresentative in the past. That 25-year-old exhibition I was talking about didn't even represent, you know, white straight majority. There were no people's stories at all, and our collections wouldn't be true to say that we didn't have anything that that was representative of anything except the majority, but it was very poor. So we're doing a lot of contemporary collecting of objects and stories at the moment. We had an exhibition, physical exhibition of that, and we've been taking elements of that and doing that online, reading stories and things. But that's enabled us to can work with those communities to deliver things that they would not have been able to deliver. And we didn't want to lose the build-up of all of those relationships. And it's taken a good couple of years. You all know these things do not happen overnight. And you know, to begin with, nobody wanted to join the community advisory group. Now people are, you know, almost kind of contacting us weekly saying, can I join? And can my partner join? And which is great, because people, you know, just think this is something that they really want to be part of. And so those voices about what they should be doing and doing it with them and not just doing it for them, you all know, you know, these are things that we're aspiring to do. And that collaboration is and consultation is, as I said before, massively important. So lots of it's going online. We asked them what they thought about all our ideas this year. We've got online exhibitions planned. They chose which one they wanted, and we said, you know, we're doing this together.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sue. There was another question from David, which I think is slightly similar, about do you see any of the great activities, such as the parcels and mentioned the digital activity, continuing in your organisations when the physical activity can restart? I think that's kind of what we've been talking about. So I'll move on to another question. It's very different, actually, but it's from Mark Barrett. Thanks, Mark. And since we're talking about staff well-being, Mark asked, where is it now? So have you read the MA's bullying report, and would you commit to challenge bullying in your organisations? So should we start with Damien? Do you want to come back? So we go back into alphabetical order.
Hi. Yes and yes, I think is the simple answer to that one. I don't think there's anyone who would condone any sort of bullying in our organisation, particularly at a leadership level, but making sure that I think pushing it slightly further beyond bullying into being a more equitable organisation, and one where everyone's views are balanced and appreciated and sought and respected, I think is sort of almost an anti-bullying approach, so that you set that comes from the leadership and that comes from the top, and that's really where as leaders and managers are that those views are respected from the newest and lowest member of staff and the team have the same sort of basic dignity and respect at work, but slightly beyond that, be really valued for what they bring to the organisation. Because museums, as we all know, every part of it's required to make the whole work, from the cleaners to the front of house to the curators to everyone else in between, that it's a team effort. It's not just one person, despite what you see in the press and in the media around the curator doing the wonderful things. It's everyone that needs to make the organisation work. So bullying's wrong. We need to support it. The report was interesting, just to shine a light on what is an unknown and underappreciated thing in the sector, really, I suppose.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, your line is cutting out a bit, but I think we heard most of that, so thanks for that. Liz, as well, do you want to answer that? I wasn't implying that anyone would condone bullying in their organisation, but more I meant, you know, is it an issue that staff talk about, and is it important, you know, those kind of things?
I think it's always important, and I think it's a really excellent piece of work that the MA have done. I will absolutely be honest, I haven't read the report, but in answer to that, of course I support it and I will read it. We're part of the University of Cambridge. The university has a dignity at work policy, which is actually, it's sort of interesting, and I'm quite interested in reading the two together. The dignity at work policy is something I look at probably on a weekly, fortnightly basis, because it, as well as addressing absolutely concerns around bullying, it also sets out positive behaviours about the sorts of workplace that we want to create and the sort of interactions. So I use that sort of approach in how we sort of do the, you know, the sort of, I suppose, how do we create an atmosphere in which bullying is known to be unacceptable and stuff. So I look forward to reading the report, and I think that's really important. And I'd recommend others to do the same. I absolutely agree. It's really, really glad to see it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liz. Sue and Steve, do you want to say anything about this? You don't have to. I've got one more question from Anthony that I'd really like to ask, but do feel free if you want to.
I was just going to say that within that policy, I was quite shocked about some of those behaviours that Tamsin was talking about, that perhaps traditionally are not thought of as, but we think of bullying as very aggressive, obvious, meant, you know, and Tamsin was very clear about it's whether you're deliberately doing those things. And, you know, she's right that, you know, you start going down that list and thinking, oh, you know, that's bullying, is it? So I think it was very good that Tamsin talked about that earlier and said, look, it's all about intention. But and what it made me do was to realise that we haven't really got a bullying policy, and we haven't talked about it nearly as much as we should. So commitment here, we're going to.
Brilliant. That's a really important point. Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so I think the final question is ending on a really complex one, but an interesting one. So I'll ask it, and then we can, and that'll be our final one. So it's from Anthony. Thanks, Anthony. It says Sue talked about funding, and at the moment there is a risk of losing this due to the culture section. Oliver Dowden warning to abstain from decolonisation and keeping museums neutral. Are we being in the process of being coerced into maintaining the status quo? Steve, do you mind having a stab at that?
I would be delighted. I think it's such an important topic, and again, I think as has been highlighted many times over a very, very long period, museums are trusted, and the reason that they are trusted is because they have independence. They can present information, discuss challenging topics in a way which is incredibly important. So I would imagine, you know, strongly the sector and at all levels, whatever your funding setup or structure is, museums will very clearly state their need to maintain that independence in a very positive way, and take some of the interesting sort of points from that debate forward, because we want to be part of the debate. We don't want to stand to one side of it. We want to be central to it. But I think with an open discussion with all partners, we can take that forward in the best possible way. But maintaining our independence and having that trust maintained with the public and the audiences and the people that we really want to work with is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Steve. Liz, do you have views on this?
I'm absolutely in agreement. I think it's something. I think, you know, I agree what Steve says. For us, I think what's been really interesting is actually, of course, things won't be different again after Black Lives Matter and about the Colson statues. And actually what the opportunity has been is that actually the conversations we've had in the team and the work that we've done looking into the legacies of empire and enslavement in our collections, the work we've done this year has been amazing. You know, we've really talked about it and thought about it, and I've got much greater buy-in from a broader group of people in a way that I think we would never have done if we hadn't been stuck at home. So, I mean, you know, there's some horrible events happened last summer, and I wouldn't ever want to say that that was a good thing, but I think out of that has come a real discussion. So although I think we do feel threatened, and we are, you know, you can't set aside the fact that, you know, we might, that sort of hunkering, fear of having to hunker down. We're not in the same place now. We're not where we were. You know, we can articulate things. The challenges with our collection is much, much better than we could a year ago.
Brilliant, thanks, Liz. Yeah, there's some amazing work going on, which is why some of the debate is a bit depressing. Like the fantastic stuff going at the Pitt Rivers is just, you know, consultative and it's just brilliant stuff, and, you know, led by communities, and, yeah, it's fantastic. So, Damien, do you want to try and come back and answer that if you're keen to jump back in?
I'll leave my camera off just because it might be better. But I think that, yeah, it is a really important point, and it's disappointing to see politicians jumping on board with things like that and dragging in the sector, which is supposedly arm's length, and funding's given on that account. I think there is, for smaller museums like my own organisation, we've got a role to play in this, and it's not about sitting and waiting on communities coming. To us, it's about setting the stall ready to welcome and receive those communities, even if we don't have the budget, and we certainly don't have massive budgets here. Just during the summer, not long after BLM last summer, we launched our Indigenous engagement policy, which is a clear set of organisational principles for us to talk to principally Native North American communities, because we've got a large collection of that, and set out how we'll work with them and reach any sort of understanding, based on the premise that we don't know that much about the collections. The curatorial team, like many others, has been hollowed out, but actually where we do things, we've got to get it right. We've got to start talking about it instead of the other, but talking about it as a source community for our museum. And that will open the gateway, hopefully, for restitution in the future if that comes. But if not, it means a better described, a better explained, a better understood collection. And that's something you can do as a small local authority museum with small budgets, because it doesn't take a lot of budget to send emails, to be open, to set out your stall online and digitally to engage with these people in these communities. And hopefully that's the direction that a lot of the sector's moving in, although you do always get the people, what about if they come and take everything out the museums? And we've been talking about decolonisation and restitution for 20 odd years when I had hair. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Brilliant, thanks, Damien. Yeah, your museum is a really, really good example of, as you're saying, a small local authority museum. The work you can do in this area is fantastic. Sue, final word to you.
Thank you. I think it would be very unfortunate if museums were being corralled into being neutral. One of the most inspiring messages from recent MA conferences that I've taken away is that you are saying to us as a sector, stop being neutral. Safe, certainly; neutral, not at all. I mean, it's something we've actually been discussing it. We had a session this week where we again tried using lots of online forms to get people to contribute their aims and objectives, and that included our community groups and our staff and our volunteers and our stakeholders. And this came up, and it's this is the community, the staff, everybody who is involved with and working together on a journey together is saying this is an important fact. We actually got an important point. What we actually got was a contact from the Australian First Nations, which I was absolutely delighted to see. Wasn't expecting it. They asked if we had Australian First Nation material, which I actually don't know the answer to, and all our curators were on furlough at the time. But I said, look, come back to me in April, and hopefully we'll have a few people back then. But if we do, I am very happy, to have those conversations about restitution, because of the way in which those objects are often acquired, and I know that's something the Pitt Rivers are particularly leading on, and great admiration to them. But I think funding should not be used for that sort of political agenda. We should be free to start having those really important, very difficult conversations about what's been taken from people, and whose right is it to have it.
Brilliant. So that's a great point to end on, and I think that emphasises, the conversations are much more sophisticated and complex than is being sort of presented often. And there's lots of decolonisation guidance and advice on the MA website as well. So do go there for any help you might need. Sadly, that's it. We've run out of time for this panel discussion. I've let it run on a bit longer because it's been so rich and interesting. So thanks so much, Steve. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Damon. Even though I can't see you at the moment. So now we're going to finish with our reps. So again, it's going to be slightly clunky, and I'm just going to find our reps amongst the attendees, and our panel now are going to return to being attendees. But thanks again to the speakers. It's been great. Thanks so much. Excellent. Hi, David. Hi, Mark. Just waiting for Rebecca, who I think...
Hey, how you doing?
Very good. Thanks, everyone. So we're running a bit over, so we'll start off quickly. And if you could all introduce yourselves and say where you work and what you do, and then also talk a bit about the issues that you interest you, and then we'll take it from there and see if we've got any more time after that. So again, we were going to go in alphabetical order, weren't we, by surname? So I think that's Mark first. Is that right?
Usually always is, every register. Got annoying because I can never Skype. So yeah, I'll try to be brief then, Simon. So yeah, hello, I'm Mark. I'm as you can tell, I'm one of the reps, and as was discussed, as Maggie said, the Southeast is a huge region, and the MA likes to put East of England into that amalgamation. So I just thought, if anyone's wondering where's the East of England, we're here, you're in the right place, and I am the only one based in the East of England. So if you wanted to come on more specific issues, then I have probably a bit more awareness about that, and so feel free. And okay, yeah, so my role in museums is a little bit hybrid. For the purposes of the rep role, because I had to put something down, I'm a casual museum assistant with Colchester and Ipswich Museum, which I've been doing for a while. But I've taken a break from working to study for a degree, graduating this year. But before that, I was a trainee with Colchester and Ipswich Museum, where my career kick-started really. And I did the MA Transformers program, and that led me to becoming more of a freelance in the sector, like ad hoc between my studies on inclusion. So the issues I want to raise, and I was quite excited to share them before, but I'm even more excited after hearing, especially from Maggie and Tamsin, what they were saying, because I think there might be some overlap. So I've broken them down to 3 that I want to focus on and what I feel is important to me. And that is diversity and inclusion. And the main questions being, are we moving quick enough? And what more could museums in our region together do? And I mean, personally, I identify as autistic. That's where my inclusion comes in. But as we've all explored, there's the issue, well, all underrepresented groups, and we talked about Black Lives Matter and the systemic racism that we've started to, well, it's always been there, but we're talking about it more and more now. And God, of course, we're talking about it a lot this week. I won't get into that. Yeah, and so that is one. And the next one, I'm looking at workforce, and this is where I'm thinking of Tamsin. And for me, it's about entry into the sector. I heard a lot of traineeships. That's brilliant. We want traineeships. I was a trainee. We need them. And yeah, so we need to find that, because of course it's going to be really hard this year. We got 2021 market. We've got all the people from 2020 that are still trying to find jobs, quite possibly, maybe even a bit from 2019. And let's not forget the redundancy fallout, which Tamsin had the very nice group. Yeah, so I want to think about that. And I'm also, like how Maggie was saying about mentioning about support in the sector, all that about kindness. I mean, I wrote it in different terms here, but it's essentially just by pure coincidence what I feel too. That and I'd even go as far to say that like in the NHS, we're seeing these unsung heroes. We highlight a carer, someone we love. What about unsung heroes in our sector? I mean, maintenance, catering, retailers, and front of house. I mean, I've worked at front of house. They feel undervalued. That is a general view. And yeah, and volunteers. We mustn't forget volunteers. So yeah, so those are my 3 focuses: diversity, inclusion, entry into the workforce, and support, feeling valued, and that. Simon, shall I stop there?
That's brilliant. That's perfect, Mark. Thanks so much.
Because I've got more.
No, that's perfect. I should probably explain at the start, put it into context. So David, Mark and Rebecca are relatively new reps. We've got a new sort of cohort of reps, and we've got 15 all over the UK, and they give their time voluntarily, which is fantastic, and they do amazing work for us, and all of them act as a kind of link between us and our members on the ground. So, and they do fantastic work, and they're brilliant to work with. So, Rebecca, over to you now.
Hey, I'm Rebecca. I am the Visitor Engagement Manager at the Royal Engineers Museum, which is in Kent. It's in Medway, to be specific. And I've been there for 5 years now. I come from Cambridge, where I was at the Airborne Assault Museum and the Museum of Cambridge. And my current role, which might sound rather ambiguous with my job title, which is a bit misleading, but I run the exhibitions and I also run community engagement. So I look after the temporary exhibitions programme, community exhibitions, and I also do community engagement outreach and help the learning manager with schools and military. The current issue that I'm dealing with and working with is decolonisation, and that's obviously a really big topic at the moment. And for us as a military museum, our galleries are pretty empire-centric. There's a lot of focus on Britain in other countries, but we have a really wide ethnographic collection, which isn't necessarily shown to its best advantage. So at the moment, we're working with the University of Sussex in the Making African Connections project, and that's also working with Brighton and the Powell Cotton Museum. And for us, it's looking at our Sudanese material from the mid-1800s onwards. We've got an exhibition going up and we can reopen. And the whole process of decolonising that particular area has been really interesting. We've been working with people from Sudan who came to the museum a few years ago. We've really been opening up the collection, learning about it, translating parts of it, which is amazing. And the focus is really, once this is done, is to how do we keep that momentum going? How do we spread it out to the rest of our collections? And we need support from other communities to help us. We need more experts in the fields to come forwards and to assist us. And like we've had for the current project. And the MA can help with this. So they've got their working group and a whole load of decolonisation resources online, which if you haven't had a look at them, please do. They're really interesting. But I think for me, the MA is it's a huge network just waiting to be tapped into. So if I don't know the answer to something, which is quite frequent, unfortunately, I can ask Tamsin or I can ask someone, and if they don't know the answer, they can put me in touch. I think it's really important we don't try and do this by ourselves. We're a community, we need to support each other. That's me.
That's brilliant, Rebecca. That's really fascinating, actually. Decolonisation and military museums. I definitely sensed a Museums Journal article coming out there somewhere. It's really sounds really interesting subject. So yeah, I'll be back in touch about that.
Okay.
So David, on to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. And hello, everybody. Can't see you. It's always really strange talking to people we can't see, but it's nice to talk to Simon, Mark, and Rebecca as well. My name is David Jewler. I'm the Museum Development Officer at the Museum of Oxford. I've been working there for the last 9 years, coming up to 10 years this year, in a number of different roles throughout that time with different responsibilities. I live out in West Oxfordshire, have done for the last 20 years. So Oxford is very much my local town. My background, I guess, study-wise, I have a BA in Egyptology and ancient history and an MA in Eastern Mediterranean and Middle Eastern archaeology. So not a huge connection with Oxford's history. However, I guess museums are kind of the key reason sort of influencing me to study those. I've been a committee member of the South and East Museum Federation for 6 years. Recently gave that up. Recently moved on from doing that role, and I've done a lot of volunteering within the museums in Oxford and cities I've studied in as well. So my role at the Museum of Oxford, as you probably guess from my job title, fundraising is a key part of it, mainly for a major redevelopment project we're currently going through. So funding to applications to trust and foundations, running public campaigns, setting up a charity, the Museum of Oxford Development Trust. I've been working on the development project for the new museum, which has been really interesting and a really unique experience, developing interpretation with collections, also communities to help on those displays and exhibitions that we'll have. And also been involved with sort of marketing and comms with the museum, supporting staff with that and volunteers as well. So we are a small team at the Museum of Oxford, local authority run museum. So I'm also an officer at the local authority, which I guess is another story as well, particularly during the last year in response to COVID, when I did spend a little bit of time sort of working with officers responding to that directly. So I'll try to be really quick. Sorry. The issue that I kind of wanted to raise, there are lots that I feel are being looked at and reviewed, and Mark, Rebecca, all of the panelists, everybody else who's been speaking has raised loads of these. Going back to something that Maggie highlighted very early on in her talk, and has been mentioned again, Anthony's question in the chat. It's about funding and fundraising going forwards. Funding is obviously so important to drive the work that we do, to overcome all of those issues that many of those issues that people have mentioned, and the question around what's being discussed at the moment about arm's length organisations sort of being directed by political needs, etc. Is all really interesting, but also I think fundraising is another thing that we could really talk about a bit more, sort of try to get to understand what each other are sort of going through and facing, because I do sometimes feel like the art of fundraising is a bit kind of hidden in some ways, but it does impact on everybody's roles. And I think the MA has, obviously, as Rebecca has said, has got a real capacity to do that with the networking opportunities. And us as South East Museum reps, we want to be able to hold events that benefit you guys. So do get in contact. There, I'll stop.
That's perfect to end on, David. Yeah, because we've sadly run out of time. But I think all of our reps, their contact details are on the MA website, so you can contact them that way. They've kind of told you what their sort of the issues they're interested in. But anything you're interested in, do feel free to get in touch with them. And as Rebecca was saying, they'll either talk to you about themselves, or they'll pass it on to someone at the MA. And also, they'll be running events and things like that, informal and formal, going forward. So you'll see a lot more of them. Just quickly, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. I just wanted to answer from Louise. One was about what the MA's decolonisation working group is up to, and they're still working on this decolonisation toolkit. It's obviously quite a complex issue, but they are working on it, and will happen later in the year, so that'll be published. The other question was, are we going to update the salary guidelines? Again, the answer is yes, it will be later in the year, but that's going to happen as well. So there will be more news about that soon. So anyway, sorry, we've run out of time. I hope you enjoyed the event. Please do feedback what you thought of it. We try and, we're trying to improve these events. We will have a new programme of members' meetings for 21-22. We'll try and make them even more interactive, and there'll be, hopefully we'll develop sort of social events afterwards and things like that. So look out for those. A quick reminder that our next online event is Moving On Up, which is next week. And then after that, there is a digital event in April. So all the information about that is on the MA website. Obviously, the big news for us is we opened our annual conference for booking. That's going to be in Liverpool and online, the famous hybrid idea. So do check out the MA website for that. And that's it really. Finally, just thanks to all our speakers, including our brilliant reps. And we'll see you all at our next event. And thanks so much to all of you for coming, to the attendees. You've been brilliant. You've asked some great questions. The chat's been fascinating. So thanks so much. See you all soon.